The alarm screamed through every corridor of the Crimson Bastion. Commander ran toward the bridge, his boots hitting the metal floor with heavy thuds. Other crew members rushed past him, their faces tight with fear. Something big was happening. When reached the bridge, he saw it. The showed hundreds of massive ships hanging in space near Jupiter. They were unlike anything humanity had ever built. Dark metal hulls covered in strange symbols, weapons that glowed with purple energy. The fleet stretched across the darkness like a swarm of angry insects. "Report," said, trying to keep his voice steady. Park, his tactical officer, looked up from her console. Her fingers were shaking. "Commander, we count 473 ships. They appeared 15 minutes ago. They're not responding to any of our hailing frequencies." The chief engineer pulled up more data on his screen. "Their energy signatures are off the charts. Each of those ships carries more firepower than our entire defense fleet combined." Stared at the alien armada. In his 20 years of service, he had faced pirates, rebel factions, and resource wars. But this was different. This was first contact, and it looked like an invasion force. The main screen flickered. A face appeared. It was not human. The creature had gray skin pulled tight over a skeletal face. 4 eyes glowed with cold yellow light. When it spoke, the translation software turned its words into English with a mechanical voice. "I am Supreme Commander, or of the Imperium. Your species is hereby ordered to surrender all military assets and submit to Imperial authority. You have 24 hours to comply. Failure to surrender will result in the complete destruction of your..." The screen showed recordings of other planets, cities burning, oceans boiling, entire civilizations wiped clean from existence. They had done this before, many times. "We have conquered 17 species," or continued. 3 refused our generous offer of survival. They no longer exist. Choose wisely, humans. You are primitive and weak. Resistance is pointless." The transmission ended. The bridge fell silent, could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. "Get me a line to Earth Command," he said quietly. The next few hours passed in chaos. Earth's government held emergency meetings. Admiral, the head of Terran Space Defense, ordered all military assets to battle stations. Politicians Jin Lee and Myra Song argued on live broadcasts about what humanity should do. Jin Lee spoke with passion. "We must negotiate. These aliens have destroyed entire worlds. We cannot fight them. Surrender means survival. War means extinction." Myra Song disagreed. "Surrender means slavery. We don't know what they'll do to us. At least if we fight, we die free." The debate raged across Earth. Some people started riots in the streets. Others prayed in churches, mosques, and temples. Parents held their children close. The entire planet held its breath. On Crimson Bastion received his orders. "Prepare evacuation protocols. Get ready to abandon the station." The government was leaning toward surrender. Looked at the orders on his screen for a long time. Then he deleted them. He called a meeting in the main hangar. The entire crew gathered. They were 412 people from 30 different countries. Scientists, soldiers, engineers, and pilots, young and old. They had all volunteered to serve on humanity's last line of defense. The youngest pilot on the station spoke up. She was only 24 years old with bright eyes that had seen too little of the galaxy. "Commander, what are we going to do?" Looked around at all the faces staring at him. He saw fear, yes, but he also saw something else. Anger, determination, pride. "The government is talking about surrender," he said. His voice echoed in the large space. "They think we should bow to these aliens, give up our weapons, trust that the will be merciful." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I think that's a mistake. These creatures came to our home and demanded we kneel. They showed us recordings of genocide and expected us to be afraid. And you know what? I am afraid. I'm terrified." Some crew members nodded, others looked down. But fear isn't the only thing I feel, continued. I'm also angry. These aliens think we're weak. They think we'll just give up because they have bigger ships and more guns. They don't know humans. They don't know what we're capable of when someone threatens our home. Stood up, what are you saying, Commander? I'm saying we have a choice. We can follow orders and evacuate. We can let Earth surrender and hope for mercy. Or we can stay here and show these invaders that humanity doesn't bow, that we don't beg, that when someone threatens to destroy our world, we fight back with everything we have. The hangar erupted with voices. Some crew members shouted in agreement, others looked uncertain, walked over too. If we fight, we'll probably die, she said quietly. That fleet could destroy this station in minutes. Probably, agreed. But at least we'll die on our feet. And maybe, just maybe, we'll hurt them enough that they think twice about what it costs to attack Earth. One by one, the crew members made their choice. Some left on the evacuation shuttles. Didn't blame them. They had families, loved ones waiting on Earth, but most stayed. Over 300 people decided that dying in battle was better than living under alien rule. Returned to the bridge. He looked at the fleet on the. They were waiting for humanity's answer, expecting fear, expecting surrender. Bora, he said to the communications officer, open a channel to the flagship. Bora Shin's hands moved across her console. Channel open, Commander. Took a deep breath. Supreme Commander, or this is Commander of the Terran Defense Station Crimson Bastion. I have received your ultimatum. He paused, and a small smile crossed his face. Our answer is no. Nodded too. Bring all weapons online. Target their command ships. If they want to fight, let's give them one they'll never forget. Across the station, weapon systems powered up, extended from their housings. Missile tubes loaded. Energy shields flickered to life. The Crimson Bastion transformed from a defensive platform into a weapon of war. On the flagship, alarms began to sound. The humans were not surrendering. They were preparing to attack. Or stared at his screens in disbelief. These primitive creatures were going to fight against his entire fleet. It was insane. It was suicide. But as the Crimson Bastion's weapons locked onto his ships, or felt something he had not felt in centuries of conquest. Uncertainty. The fleet moved forward like a wall of darkness. Their ships formed perfect lines and columns, arranged in patterns that showed military discipline perfected over thousands of years. To Orr, this was how proper warfare looked: clean, organized, honorable. He did not yet understand that humans had a different definition of honor. Forward assault groups advance, or commanded. Break their defenses with overwhelming force. Show them the price of defiance. 60 warships accelerated toward Crimson Bastion, their weapons charged, ready to reduce the human station to burning debris in minutes. On the Bastion's bridge, Sung-Han watched the attack develop on his tactical display. As the station's drone commander, his job was to coordinate thousands of small, unmanned fighters. Most military strategists thought drones were support units. Sung saw them differently. Release the swarm, he said calmly. Hatches all over Crimson Bastion opened. Thousands of small craft poured out like angry bees from a disturbed hive. The drones were cheap, fast, and expendable. Each carried enough explosives to damage a warship if it hit the right spot. The commanders watched the drones swarm with confusion. The small craft moved in chaotic patterns. There was no formation, no discipline. Some flew in tight spirals. Others zigzagged randomly. A few even appeared to be flying backward. Primitive chaos, one officer reported to Orr. Their control systems must be malfunctioning. But the chaos was intentional. Sung had programmed each drone with random movement algorithms. The targeting computers, designed to track orderly fleet movements, couldn't predict where the drones would go next. Energy beams and missiles fired at empty space while the drones swarmed around the attack. Targeting computers can't lock on. a weapons officer reported, panic creeping into his voice. Then fire manually, or snapped. But firing manually at thousands of small, erratically moving targets was nearly impossible. While the wasted ammunition on the drone swarm, Sung grinned at his console. "Your turn," said. The weapons engineer had been waiting for this moment her entire career. She activated the experimental batteries that ringed Crimson Bastion. These weren't energy weapons like most modern militaries used. They were old-fashioned kinetic weapons, upgraded with human engineering. The fired, chunks of metal accelerated to incredible speeds, moving so fast they became almost invisible. They crossed the distance to the fleet in seconds. The first projectile punched through a cruiser's shields as if they weren't there. The metal slug carried so much kinetic energy that it went completely through the ship, leaving a glowing hole in its wake. The cruiser's hull buckled and collapsed. Internal explosions rippled through its structure. "What kind of weapon is that?" an officer shouted. "They're throwing metal at us," another replied, his voice filled with shock and disgust. "Solid projectiles, that's barbaric." But barbaric or not, they were effective. 3 more ships took critical hits. Their advanced shields were designed to deflect energy weapons, not solid matter moving at relativistic speeds. "All fighters launch now," ordered. Wu strapped into his fighter's cockpit and felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. He led a squadron called the Laughing Ghosts. They had earned their name through dangerous missions and a dark sense of humor. Today, they would earn it again. "Ghost leader to all units," Wu said over the squadron channel. "Time to teach these aliens what crazy looks like." His fighter launched from the hangar, followed by 20 others. They accelerated toward the fleet at maximum speed. Their approach vector made no tactical sense. They were heading straight into the enemy's defensive fire. "They're committing suicide," a tactical officer observed. But suicide was not Wu's plan. At the last possible moment, his squadron broke formation. Each fighter went in a different direction, spiraling and weaving through the space between ships. They were moving so fast and so unpredictably that the enemy's point defense systems couldn't track them all. Wu opened a broadcast on all frequencies. Instead of military communications, he played music. Ancient Korean War drums pounded through the speakers, mixing with modern electronic beats. The rhythm was aggressive, primal, meant to unsettle. "What is that noise?" or demanded. "It appears to be some form of cultural audio," his communication officer replied. "We don't understand its purpose." The purpose was psychological warfare. They had never fought an enemy that used music as a weapon. They didn't understand that humans had learned long ago how to get inside an opponent's head. Wu's fighter screamed past a battleship, firing missiles at its engine pods. Other ghosts followed, each targeting weak points that they didn't think anyone would be crazy enough to approach. The battleship shuddered as multiple explosions tore through its propulsion system. On Crimson Bastion, Bora Shin monitored all the communication channels. She was the station's communications officer, and she noticed something important. They kept trying to establish formal combat protocols. They sent requests for rules of engagement. They asked about surrender terms. They wanted to know which weapons were considered acceptable. "Commander," Bora said, "they're trying to get us to fight by their rules." Looked at her. "What rules?" "Exactly," Bora replied with a slight smile. "They expect warfare to follow protocols, formation fighting, honor duels between ships, advance warnings before attacks. They're confused because we're not doing any of that." Understood immediately. They're used to civilized warfare. We're not being civilized. "Should we be?" asked. The bridge crew exchanged glances, then spoke up. "They came here to destroy our planet. I think civilized went out the window when they threatened genocide." Nodded, agreed. Bora sent no response to their protocol requests. Let them stay confused. The battle raged for 6 more hours. They kept trying to engage in proper formation warfare. The humans kept refusing to cooperate. Drones attacked from unexpected angles, fired when shields were oriented the wrong way. Human fighters appeared in places they shouldn't be able to reach. They began losing ships, first 5, then 10, then 20. Each loss was small by their standards, but the total kept climbing, and they weren't destroying Crimson Bastion quickly like they had planned. Or watched his tactical display with growing frustration. His fleet outnumbered the humans 100-1. His ships were more advanced. His warriors were experienced conquerors. Yet somehow, these primitive humans were fighting them to a standstill. "Pull back the forward groups," he finally ordered. His officers stared at him in shock. "Commander, the Imperium has never retreated from." "I said pull back," or snapped. "We're taking unnecessary casualties. Reform the fleet at defensive range. We'll reassess and attack again with better preparation." The ships, for the first time in their empire's history, they had been forced to retreat by an inferior opponent. On Crimson Bastion, exhausted crew members slumped at their stations. They had won the first round, but the cost was clear. Ammunition reserves were depleted by 40%. 3 batteries were damaged. 17 fighters hadn't returned, including 5 ghosts. Looked at the casualty reports and felt the weight of command crushing down on him. 23 crew members dead, 41 wounded, and the fleet was still out there, barely scratched. "How long until they attack again?" he asked. She studied her screens. "Based on their formation movements, I'd say 12 to 18 hours. They're reorganizing." "Good, everyone take shifts. Rest while you can, eat, sleep if possible." Looked around the bridge. "We held them off once. Now we need to do it again." As the crew rotated out for rest periods, found Wu in the pilot's ready room. He was staring at the empty chairs where his lost squadron members should have been sitting. "We hurt them," she said quietly. "Not enough," Wu replied. "We need to hurt them more." Far away in the flagship, or studied the battle recordings. He watched human fighters perform impossible maneuvers. He analyzed the chaotic drone tactics. He reviewed the projectile weapons that ignored shield technology. "What kind of species fights like this?" he asked aloud. His second-in-command had no answer, but deep in his thoughts, a small seed of doubt began to grow. Maybe these humans were more dangerous than intelligence reports had suggested. Maybe threatening there had been a mistake. The second wave hit like a hammer. Or had learned from his mistakes. This time, the fleet didn't advance in neat formations. They came from multiple directions at once, splitting their forces to overwhelm the human defenses. Heavy siege platforms hung back and bombarded Crimson Bastion from long range. Smaller, faster ships darted in and out, testing for weak points. The station shook with each impact. Alarms screamed. Lights flickered and died in several sections. "Hull breach on Deck 7, someone shouted. "Fire suppression failing in the starboard hangar," another voice called out. Gripped his command chair as the deck tilted under his feet. The showed ships closing in from all sides. There were too many, too close. "Concentrate fire on the siege platforms," ordered. "If we can take those out, we might survive this." But they were ready for human tactics now. They had learned to spread their formations to make the drones less effective. They rotated their shields constantly to deflect the fire. They jammed communications to disrupt coordination between fighters. In engineering, worked frantically to keep the station alive. Conduits exploded around him as he rerouted power from damaged systems. The fusion reactors were running at 120% capacity, far above safe levels. "I need more power to shields," his voice crackled over the intercom. "There is no more power," shouted back. He pulled up a schematic on his tablet. "Unless we shut down life support to the residential quarters." "How many people are in those quarters?" 217. Closed his eyes for a moment, then made the decision. He shut down life support to the residential areas. 200 people would have to move to emergency shelters with limited air supplies. Some might not make it, but if the shields failed, everyone would die. This was command. This was the weight of survival. Every choice was horrible. On Earth, the government was in crisis. The broadcasts from Crimson Bastion showed desperate fighting, ships exploding, crew members dying. The station itself was being torn apart piece by piece. Jin Lee stood before the emergency council. His face was haggard from lack of sleep. "We must signal surrender immediately. Our brave defenders have made their point. They have shown courage. But courage isn't enough against overwhelming force. We need to save our species." Many council members nodded in agreement. The logic was sound. Pride was worthless if humanity went extinct. But Myra Song slammed her hand on the table. "And what happens after we surrender?" They showed us recordings of conquered species. Some of them did survive, as slaves, as experimental subjects, as livestock. Is that the future you want for our children? "Better than no future at all," Jin replied. The argument escalated. Voices rose. The council chamber descended into chaos. They were minutes away from calling a vote on surrender when Admiral entered the room. He didn't ask for permission to speak. He simply activated a live feed from Crimson Bastion and projected it on the main screen. The council fell silent. The footage showed outside the station in a damaged spacesuit. She was climbing along the hull, moving hand over hand toward a broken turret. Behind her, space battles raged. Fire streaked past, close enough that her suit's radiation alarms were screaming warnings she couldn't hear through the vacuum. She reached the turret. Her hands moved quickly, reconnecting severed power cables and replacing burned-out control modules. The camera showed her face through her helmet visor. She was 24 years old. She should have been enjoying life on Earth, going to parties, falling in love, starting a career. Instead, she was repairing weapons in the middle of a space battle, knowing she could die at any second. The status light turned green, gave a thumbs up to someone inside the station. Then she began the long climb back to the airlock. When she made it inside, she didn't rest. The footage showed her running toward the fighter bay, climbing into a cockpit, and launching into the battle. Admiral looked at the council. "That is who we're discussing. That is what surrender means. We're not just giving up weapons and territory. We're telling people like that their sacrifice meant nothing, that we valued survival over dignity." He pointed at the screen where the battle still raged. "Those people up there had the choice to evacuate. Most stayed. They know they're probably going to die. They're doing it anyway because they believe humanity is worth fighting for. And you want to signal surrender while they're still fighting." The council chamber remained silent. "Call your vote," said quietly. "But remember that history will judge what we decide here today." The vote was called. Surrender was rejected by a narrow margin. Earth would keep fighting. Crimson Bastion would receive no relief force, no reinforcements, no rescue. But they also wouldn't be ordered to give up. On the station received the message. He read it 3 times to make sure he understood. No surrender, no retreat, just an acknowledgement that the fight would continue until the end. He gathered what remained of the crew in the damaged main hangar. There were fewer faces now, so many empty spaces where friends had stood. Blood stained the deck plates. The smell of burned metal and plastic filled the air. "I just got word from Earth," said. His voice echoed in the space. "They're not ordering us to surrender, but they're also not sending help. We're on our own." He paused, looking at the exhausted faces around him. "I'm giving anyone who wants to leave one last chance. There's still one functional shuttle. Anyone who wants to evacuate to Earth can go. No shame, no dishonor. You've already done more than anyone could ask." Nobody moved. Waited a full minute. Still, nobody walked toward the shuttle. Finally spoke up. She was the station's head medic, and she had been working for 20 consecutive hours treating casualties. Her scrubs were covered in other people's blood. Dark circles ringed her eyes. "Commander, we're not just fighting for Earth anymore," she said. "We're teaching the universe a lesson. We're showing every empire, every conqueror out there that humanity doesn't kneel. If we die here, we die as a warning. A warning that says conquering Earth costs everything you have." The crew erupted in agreement, fists pumped in the air. People who could barely stand found the energy to shout defiance. Felt something break inside his chest and then reform harder, stronger. These people were choosing to stay, choosing to fight, choosing almost certain death because they believed it meant something. "Then we make our deaths count," he said. "Sung Woo with me. We need to plan something crazy." The group gathered in a damaged conference room, pulled up what remained of their tactical data. "We're down to 37% ammunition," she reported. "Shields are holding at 40% capacity. We have 61 functional fighters left. They haven't even committed their full fleet yet." "So we can't win a straight fight," Sung said. "Good thing we never planned to fight straight." Wu leaned forward. "What if we stop defending and start attacking?" "Against that entire fleet," shook his head. "That's suicide." "We're already dead," Wu replied. "But we can choose how we die. We can sit here and get pounded to scrap metal, or we can make them regret ever coming to our solar system." Looked at the tactical display. The flagship hung at the center of their formation, directing the attack. It was the brain of their operation. If that ship was destroyed or damaged, the entire fleet would be thrown into chaos. "What are you thinking, Commander?" asked. "I'm thinking about ramming that flagship with this entire station," said quietly. The room fell silent. Then Sung started laughing. It wasn't happy laughter. It was the laughter of someone who had crossed the line between sanity and something else. "That's the most insane plan I've ever heard," Sung said. "I love it." Ran calculations on his tablet. "We could use the station's emergency propulsion to build up speed. Rig the fusion reactors to overload on impact. The explosion would be massive." "They would see us coming," pointed out. "They'd destroy us before we got close." "Not if we give them something else to worry about," Wu said. "Every fighter we have left hits them at the same time. Maximum chaos. We make them think it's a desperation attack." Nodded slowly. "And while they're focused on the fighters, we accelerate the station toward their flagship. Even if they realize what we're doing, they won't be able to get out of the way in time." "What about the crew?" His voice came over the intercom. She had been listening. "If we're ramming the flagship, there's no way to evacuate everyone." "Then we make peace with that," said. "We started this together. We'll finish it together." Outside, the fleet prepared for their final assault, or was confident now. The human station was broken. One more push and it would fall. He did not yet realize that he wasn't fighting a military installation anymore. He was fighting against the collective will of people who had decided that some things were worth dying for. And humanity had just decided that teaching aliens respect was worth any price. The plan was insane. Everyone knew it. That's what made it perfect. Worked through the night, configuring the station's emergency propulsion system. These thrusters were designed to make small adjustments to Crimson Bastion's orbit, not to accelerate a massive military platform toward an enemy flagship. But wasn't a conventional engineer. He disabled every safety protocol, rerouted all available power, and pushed the engines beyond their design limits. "Will this work?" asked, watching his hands fly across the control panels. "Define work," replied without looking up. "Will it make us go fast? Yes. Will the engines explode from the stress? Probably. Will we reach the flagship before everything falls apart? Maybe." "Those aren't reassuring odds." "You asked for a suicide run, Commander. Suicide runs don't come with guarantees." In the hangar bay, Wu gathered the remaining pilots. 61 fighters. 61 pilots who knew they were about to die. The plan required them to attack the entire fleet head-on while Crimson Bastion positioned for the ramming maneuver. "This is going to be our last flight," Wu said simply. "No sugarcoating it. We're going out there to die. But we're going to die so loudly, so aggressively, and so annoyingly that every in that fleet will be too busy dealing with us to notice what the station is doing." Raised her hand. She looked impossibly young in her flight suit. "What if we want to evacuate after the attack run?" Wu smiled sadly. "Then you'll have about 90 seconds to reach the pods before the station impacts. Good luck with that." "That's what I thought," said. She walked to her fighter without another word. On the bridge, made a discovery that changed everything. She had been analyzing fleet movements for days, looking for patterns. Now she found something unexpected in the damage reports. "Commander, I need you to look at this," she said urgently. Came over to her station, pulled up footage from the first battle. It showed ships taking hits from human weapons, but some of the explosions looked wrong. They were too big, too destructive. "What am I seeing?" asked. "I think some of our damage came from our own weapons," said. "Look at this section. These explosions are consistent with lunar defense platform signatures." His eyes widened. The lunar platforms were destroyed in the opening attack. "That's what we reported," said carefully. "That's what they believe, but what if they weren't destroyed? What if we just made them think that?" Stared at her. That would mean someone on Earth has been running a deception operation this entire time, finished. And if the lunar platforms are still operational, we're not doing a suicide run. We're bait. Immediately called Earth Command. Admiral appeared on the screen, and his face told everything he needed to know. "The lunar platforms are operational," confirmed. "We've kept them in total communications blackout since the invasion started. They think they destroyed them. We fed them fake damage reports through compromised channels." "Why didn't you tell me?" demanded. "Because if you knew, you might have fought differently. They are good at reading human behavior. We needed your desperation to be real. Your willingness to sacrifice the station had to be genuine. Otherwise, they'd have suspected a trap." Felt anger and relief mixing together. "So this whole time, we had backup." "Yes, but Commander, here's the problem. The lunar platforms only get one shot at surprise. If we reveal them too early, they can adapt. We need them committed. We need them bunched up and distracted. Your suicide run is still necessary. It just doesn't have to end in suicide." Closed the communication channel and turned to his crew. Change of plans. He explained everything. The lunar platforms, the deception, the real plan that had been in motion all along. Some crew members felt betrayed. Others felt hope for the first time in days. "We still have to sell the suicide run," said. "They have to believe we're desperate enough to ram them. They have to commit their entire fleet to stopping us. Only then will the lunar platforms fire." Bora spoke up from communications. "Commander, I've been monitoring channels. They're preparing for their final assault. They expect us to break within the hour." "Good," said. "Let's give them exactly what they expect. Initiate the acceleration sequence." Deep in the station's engine room, activated the modified propulsion system. The entire structure groaned as the thrusters fired at full power. Crimson Bastion began to move, slowly at first, then faster and faster. On the flagship, alarms shrieked. "The human station is moving," a tactical officer reported, "accelerating directly toward us." Or studied the trajectory. "They're going to ram us, destroy them immediately." Ships opened fire with everything they had. Energy beams and missiles streaked toward Crimson Bastion, but the station's shields, though weak, held just long enough. And then the human fighters launched. Wu led the charge, 61 fighters against hundreds of warships. The odds were impossible. They attacked anyway. The laughing ghosts scattered in every direction, firing missiles at random targets. They weren't trying to destroy ships. They were trying to create chaos, confusion, panic. And it worked. The fleet, trained for orderly combat, didn't know how to respond to the insanity of human tactics. Fighters appeared where they shouldn't be. Missiles came from unexpected angles. And always, there was that damned music playing over the communication channels. War drums and electronic beats mixing with human laughter. "Focus fire on the station," or ordered. But his ships were too busy defending themselves from suicidal fighter attacks. Crimson Bastion accelerated faster. The distance to the flagship shrank. 5,000 kilometers, 4,000, 3,000. "They're actually going to hit us," a officer said in disbelief. Or finally understood. These humans were insane. They were going to destroy their own station just to take him down with them. No species he had ever conquered would make such a sacrifice. "All ships reposition to intercept," he commanded. The entire fleet began moving toward Crimson Bastion. They bunched together, focusing every weapon on stopping the station's approach. 2,000 kilometers, 1,500. On Crimson Bastion gave the final order. "All hands evacuate now. Get to the pods, that's a direct order." Most of the crew obeyed. They ran for the emergency escape pods knowing they had seconds to spare, but some stayed on the bridge. Bora, Sung, they refused to leave. "We started this together," said quietly. Wanted to argue, he wanted to order them to evacuate, but he understood. These people had chosen their path. He wouldn't dishonor their choice. "Wu, all fighters break off and transmitted. You've done enough." "Negative, Commander," Wu replied. The sounds of weapon fire and explosions filled the background. "We're keeping them busy right up until the end. It's been an honor." 300 kilometers. And then from the lunar surface, 73 defense platforms powered up simultaneously. They had been hiding in radio silence for days. They had thought them destroyed. They were wrong. The lunar guns fired. Massive energy beams and kinetic projectiles crossed the distance in seconds. They hit the fleet from an unexpected angle, from a direction where the aliens had positioned no defenses. Or's tactical display exploded with damage reports. Ships throughout his fleet were taking critical hits. The humans had tricked him. The desperation had been theater. The sacrifice had been bait. "Retreat," he shouted, "full retreat." But it was too late. The fleet, bunched together to stop Crimson Bastion, was perfectly positioned for the lunar platforms to devastate them. Ships exploded. Shields overloaded. The perfect formation became a death trap. On Crimson Bastion made one last adjustment. He used the emergency thrusters to alter their trajectory slightly. Instead of hitting the flagship dead center, they would pass close enough to damage it without destroying themselves. "Hold on," he shouted. The station scraped along the flagship's hull with a scream of tearing metal. Explosions rippled across both vessels. Crimson Bastion's shields failed. Hull breaches opened to space, but the station held together barely. When the chaos cleared, looked at the fleet was in full retreat. More than half their ships were destroyed or disabled. The rest were running for the edge of the solar system as fast as their engines could carry them. "We did it," Bora whispered. On the lunar platforms, human crews watched the fleet flee. On Earth, billions of people celebrated. In the remains of Crimson Bastion, the crew that had stayed began to laugh. They laughed because they had survived. They laughed because they had won. They laughed because the galaxy's mightiest empire had just learned a very expensive lesson about threatening humanity's home. In the wreckage of his flagship, or listened to the sound of human laughter echoing across every communication channel, and he finally understood what kind of species he had tried to conquer. The kind that laughed in the face of death and made death itself blink first. 6 months passed. The wreckage of Crimson Bastion floated in orbit, a monument to humanity's defiance. Engineers had stabilized the structure, but nobody wanted to fully repair it. The scars told a story. The holes in the hull, the melted armor, the damaged corridors where crew members had died defending their home. These wounds spoke louder than any history book ever could. Commander stood in what remained of the bridge, looking out at Earth. He wore a new uniform now, one with more decorations than he felt comfortable carrying. Fleet Admiral, they called him, leader of Earth's expanding space defense network. Sometimes he missed being just a station commander. "Still feels strange, doesn't it?" said, joining him at the observation window. The chief engineer had his own new title now, Director of Weapons Development. He looked equally uncomfortable with the promotion. "I keep expecting to wake up and find out we died that day," admitted. "That all of this is just some dying dream." "We came close enough," replied. "Another 10 seconds on our ramming run and we would have hit too hard. The station would have broken apart." 10 seconds between legend and death," said quietly. Far from Earth, in the neutral space controlled by the Galactic Council, humanity prepared to address the galaxy's ruling body. It had taken 6 months of negotiations, debates, and political maneuvering. But finally, Earth had been granted a hearing. Captain Park walked through the halls of the Council station, trying not to show how nervous she felt. She had faced warships without flinching, but diplomacy terrified her. Behind her walked a delegation of human representatives. Jin Lee and Myra Song had put aside their differences to present a united front. Admiral came as military advisor. The council chamber was enormous. Representatives from 43 species sat in a circular arrangement. Some looked like animals from Earth mythology. Others were so alien that minds struggled to process their forms. All of them watched the humans with varying degrees of curiosity, respect, and fear. The council leader, a being that looked like living crystal, spoke in harmonious tones that the translation devices rendered as a neutral voice. The species known as humanity requests recognition and membership in the Galactic Council. This body will hear their petition and render judgment. Stepped forward. She had written and rewritten her speech 100 times. Now, standing before the galaxy's most powerful beings, she threw away her notes and spoke from her heart. 6 months ago, the Imperium came to Earth with overwhelming force and demanded our surrender. We refused, we fought, and against all odds we survived. She paused, letting the words sink in. "I'm not here to brag about our victory. I'm here to make sure the galaxy understands what that victory means." She activated a holographic display. It showed footage from the battle. Crimson Bastion under fire. Human fighters attacking impossible odds. The final ramming run that should have killed everyone aboard. "Humanity has been fighting wars for our entire existence. We've perfected warfare in ways that more civilized species can't imagine. We use deception, psychological warfare, asymmetric tactics. We break rules we never agreed to follow. We sacrifice our own lives to hurt our enemies." His voice hardened. "We are very, very good at killing." Several council members shifted uncomfortably. This was not the typical petition speech. But continued, "Humanity didn't come here seeking war. We came seeking peace. We want to join the galactic community. We want to trade, share knowledge, and build friendships with other species. They didn't give us that choice. They chose violence. We simply responded in the only language they understood." Jin Lee stepped forward. "I argued for surrender. Before the battle, I believed that survival was more important than pride. I was wrong. Not because pride matters more than survival, but because I misunderstood what surrender would cost. They didn't offer peace. They offered slavery with a different name." Myra Song joined him. What humanity demonstrated at Crimson Bastion wasn't aggression. It was the response of a species that has learned, through thousands of years of hard lessons, that sometimes the only way to achieve peace is to make war too expensive for your enemies to continue. Admiral walked to the center of the chamber. "Let me be very clear about humanity's position. We don't seek conflict. We're not interested in conquest. We have no desire to build an empire, but we will defend ourselves with absolutely everything we have. Any species that threatens Earth will face the same reception they received." He looked around the chamber at all the alien representatives. "We know that scares some of you. It should, but it should also reassure you, because a species that fights that hard to defend its own home will be an equally fierce ally to those who treat us with respect." The council leader's crystal form pulsed with light. "The Imperium has filed formal protests. They claim humanity violated the accepted rules of warfare." "We never agreed to any rules," replied simply. "You can't violate a contract you never signed. They came to conquer. We demonstrated why that was a mistake. If the Council wants humanity to follow galactic warfare protocols in the future, we're willing to negotiate. But understand that those negotiations happen between equals, not between conquerors and conquered." Debate erupted in the chamber. Some species argued that humanity was too dangerous to allow into the galactic community. Others pointed out that excluding them would be even more dangerous. Humanity had proven they could fight. Better to have them as allies than enemies. The vote was called. It wasn't unanimous. 17 species voted against human membership, but 26 voted in favor. Earth was now officially recognized as a sovereign member of the Galactic Council. Back on Earth, celebrations erupted. People danced in the streets. For the first time in human history, they weren't alone in the universe. They had allies, trading partners, friends among the stars. But in the halls of Crimson Bastion, now preserved as a museum, the mood was quieter. The surviving crew gathered in the damaged hangar bay where Commander had given his final speech before the battle. Walked among the memorial plaques. Each one bore the name of a crew member who had died defending Earth. 23 names from the initial battle, 41 more from the second wave, 19 from the final engagement, 83 people total who would never see humanity join the Galactic Council. "They should be here," said quietly. "They earned this more than we did." "They are here," Wu replied. He had survived the fighter attack, though his ship had been so damaged he barely made it back. "Every time someone visits this station, they see what these people sacrificed. That's immortality." Admiral arrived to give a tour to the first group of alien dignitaries visiting Earth. They walked through the battle-scarred corridors, saw the patched hull breaches, touched the scorched metal where human blood had been spilled. One alien, a diplomatic envoy from a species humanity had never met, asked a question. "Why didn't you repair the damage? You have the resources to make this station look new again." Looked at the alien for a long moment. "Because this station isn't just a military platform. It's a reminder, to us and to everyone else. It reminds humanity what we're capable of when we work together. And it reminds the rest of the galaxy what happens when someone decides to test us." "You mean it's a threat?" the alien said. "No," replied. "It's a warning. There's a difference. A threat says I'm going to hurt you. A warning says don't make me hurt you. We hope no one ever makes us fight like this again. But if they do, this station proves we know how." Years passed. The story of Crimson Bastion spread throughout the galaxy. It was told in 1,000 languages on 10,000 worlds. Some species saw it as an inspiration. Others saw it as a cautionary tale. All of them understood the message. Humanity had earned its place among the stars. The Imperium never recovered from its defeat. Their successor government sent formal apologies and paid reparations. They also sent military observers to study human tactics. Know your enemy had always been their doctrine. Now they wanted to make sure they never became humanity's enemy again. In human space, defense stations modeled after Crimson Bastion began appearing around every major colony. They bore the same emblem, a laughing skull. The message was clear. Earth's children had inherited their parents' defiance. On a new station orbiting Mars, Commander, now a full captain, trained the next generation of defenders. She told them stories of the first battle, of refusal to surrender, of clever deception, of impossible engineering, of Wu's fearless attack runs. "Why do we laugh?" one young recruit asked. Smiled. "We laugh because fear is a weapon that only works if you let it. They wanted us to be afraid. They showed us recordings of genocide and expected us to cower. Instead, we laughed in their faces and showed them that threatening humanity costs more than any empire is willing to pay." She looked out at Earth, blue and beautiful in the distance. "We laugh because we're still here, because our planet is still ours, because we prove that human stubbornness is stronger than any alien weapon." The recruits nodded, understanding blooming in their eyes. Far away in the deepest parts of space, other empires watched humanity's expansion. They noted the defense stations, the weapons technology, the unwillingness to back down from any challenge. Some saw opportunity for trade and alliance. Others saw a threat to be monitored carefully. But all of them learned the lesson that they had learned the hard way. Earth was defended by a species that had weaponized creativity, stubbornness, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat. A species that would sacrifice everything to protect what was theirs. In the Galactic Council archives, the official report on the Battle of Crimson Bastion concluded with a single observation. Humanity's greatest strength is not their technology or their numbers. It is their inability to understand the concept of hopeless odds. When faced with certain defeat, they simply choose not to accept it. This makes them simultaneously the galaxy's most valuable allies and its most dangerous enemies. On Crimson Bastion, stood in his old command chair one last time before officially handing the station over to its new role as a museum. He looked at where the fleet had once appeared, where ultimatums had been delivered and rejected, where humanity had drawn a line and dared the galaxy to cross it. "They ordered our surrender," he said quietly to himself. "We laughed and fired back." And that, more than any weapon or treaty, was why humanity would never be conquered. Because when the galaxy demanded they kneel, humans had a simple response: make us. The legend of Crimson Bastion would endure for generations, not as a story of war, but as a story of choice. The choice to fight rather than submit. The choice to risk everything rather than accept slavery. The choice to show the universe that humanity's spirit could not be broken by threats or force. And across the stars, whenever a new species encountered humans for the first time, they were told the same warning: be respectful, be honest, be fair. Because if you threaten these people, they don't surrender. They laugh. And then they show you why that laughter should terrify you more than any war cry ever could.